Well, we've looked at the worst of the worst. That only seems right now that we take a look at the best of the worst. And none of these movies are good, they're not skin-peelingly difficult to sit through. And I had to be careful when making this list that I didn't confuse the quality of the film with the quality of the riff. Riffs tend to be better the worse a movie is. Like, I love the MST presentation of Horrors of Spider Island. I could and have watched it over and over again, but that film is not any kind of good. On the other hand, I thought the riff for The Day the Earth Froze was actually kind of boring, but that might be because the film itself is actually not that bad. Also, keep in mind that these are the best of all the films I've seen so far, which, like I've said, is really only a small percentage of the total MST riffing library. So here we go. If you want to take over the world by inflicting bad movies on the populace, these are a few that you should maybe avoid.
Legos.
The top 10 not so bad films ever featured on MST.
And thanks for not sending such a bad movie this time. Yeah.
Number 10.
What do you mean, thanks?
So, you are going to send us a movie though, huh?
Yeah, and it's pretty bad. I hope that's okay.
Ooh, boy, I'm not making myself look too good with this one, huh? Well, okay, it is kind of lame. Okay, it's very lame, but I have a weakness for all things time travel. I find the concept fascinating. I love seeing different interpretations of it and how different characters handle the power to go back and forth in time. Not that this is a particularly good use of your time travel. It's weak and watery, full of plot holes and a deus ex machina fairy tale happy ending. But it has a functional script, characters with clearly defined personalities and motivations. Plus, the stuff at the end with the Revolutionary War soldiers is just, oh man, it's so cheesy, I can't help but find it accidentally hilarious. This is no cinematic masterpiece by any means, but for my personal tastes, it's one of the more tolerable experiences in the show's history.
Delete copies of film? Yes. Delete memory of film from mankind's consciousness? Yes.
Number 9.
What do you mean, thanks?
Well, Joel, your film today is called Moon 02.
This is going to be a recurring theme on this list. I like the cheesy sci-fi stuff. And Moon 02 might be horribly dated, but it's kind of a trip to watch. At the very least, it's got something resembling a plot and characters. It centers around a colony on the moon. That's interesting. And the moon scenes are actually kind of cool. Not to mention the anti-gravity bar fight is more accidental hilarity and... Okay, I'm a sucker for terrible puns and groaners, so this one actually got a chuckle out of me. No, it's not a great film, but I had fun with it. It's definitely one of the less painful offerings in the show's history. And it's got a rockin' theme song.
I hope this turns back into a cartoon kind of to seal the whole thing up.
Yeah.
Number 8.
What do you mean, thanks?
I promise. It's a real piece of cheese called Space Mutiny.
Oh, don't get me wrong, this is a bad movie. It's really bad. Bad sets, bad acting, bad writing.
Hey, she's dead!
Wait a minute!
She died!
This is some ripe 80s cheese, but I happen to have a bottomless tolerance for 80s cheese. Well, almost bottomless, you gotta draw the line somewhere. The biggest problem with Space Mutiny is it's just kinda hard to take it seriously. It feels more like a parody of sci-fi tropes than an actual sci-fi film, something Debbie Reynolds would later try to use in defense of the film. But you know what? When a film's biggest crime is being just kinda silly, I'll take that over 100 rape revenge flicks and poorly lit train wrecks any day.
Does that mean you won't marry me?
Huh?
I think you skipped a line.
Number 7.
What do you mean, thanks?
Send the silly satellite another crappy movie! Yay!
Oh, you heard me. I think this malformed turd of a film is actually not that bad. And let's be clear here, it's no unfairly dismissed sci-fi horror classic, but there is some semblance of a story, and it's actually halfway interesting. The central concept is interesting anyway. A farm of cloned children who are raised like normal human beings, only to be killed off when they reach a certain age and their organs sent to the people they were cloned from, so the quote, originals can go on being young and healthy forever. I mean, yeah, it's overdramatic and rife with plot holes. Why didn't they just clone the organs? But in terms of the vague sci-fi horror stuff featured on MST, this concept is at least stronger than most. Also, I have a weakness for really character-driven stories, and the characters do drive the plot here. It would have been better if the characters involved had more personality or were more likable, relatable, and especially more proactive. The lead character spends the entire movie fighting to learn the truth and break free of this clone farm, only to decide at the end that he wants to go back to the status quo because it's home. Congratulations, you've accomplished nothing. But at the very least, there was potential here, and I'm not the only one who thought so. Michael Bay's 2005 release, The Island, is basically a ripoff of Clonus. Misty's apparently brought this to the attention of the director Robert Fiveson, who sued DreamWorks and got a nice out-of-court settlement. See? Mystery Science Theater did do some good things for the creators they riffed on.
She really was on top of Old Smokey, huh?
Number 6.
What do you mean, thanks?
Why don't you grab your brain and head up to the satellite and watch that movie of yours and think about this moment, all right?
Thank you, Mike.
Not to be confused with a film about a killer snowman. Or that other Jack Frost film about a snowman. Or the Rankin Bass film. Or this Jack Frost. Look, I don't know why they changed the name, because this really isn't about Jack Frost. This was the last of the Russo-Finnish collaborations, and it's got a lot going for it. For one thing, it looks pretty good. Compared to most MST fare, the production is pretty high. Good lighting and staging, costume sets, decent effects. But what really puts this one over the edge is the acting. You can't say the actors in this movie were wanting for enthusiasm, and it's just a nice change of pace from all the half-assed and phoned-in performances in other films. Easily the two most entertaining characters are the Hunchback Fairy and Jack Frost, or if you prefer, Baba Yaga the Witch and Morozko. Yeah, it's another case of the dub watering things down. But it's still a pretty decent film. Sure, some of the morals may be a bit questionable. Not asking for help when you're freezing to death is a sign of moral fiber. You should be this selfless too. But they do at least attempt to teach the main character a lesson, even if the execution leaves something to be desired.
So if you speculate about doing good, it's better than actually doing it?
Apparently.
It's easy to watch, easy to listen to. Some of the jokes are pretty funny. It's all around pretty entertaining.
It's a three-pig open sleigh.
On Wilbur, on Gordy, on Babe.
Oh, blow it out. Your experiment today is a Swedish fantasy called The Day the Earth Froze.
Yeah, this really isn't that bad. At the very least, it's not painful. The characters actually managed to be likable, and unlike a lot of the more nothing films featured on the show, the conflict in this movie is an endless winter. There's some cool effects, and although the Sampo is never really explained, the mythology is at the least interesting. The film is based on the Kalevala, the national epic of Finland, and widely regarded as the most influential work of Finnish literature. The dub kind of watered down the script. I'm sure it would be even more interesting in the original language. Not something I'd want to watch every day, but for what it is, it's not bad.
Hey, you know, you don't like the weather in Sweden, just wait a minute, you know?
Number 4.
What do you mean, thanks?
Turns out, it is possible to make one of those educational film reels halfway entertaining.
Your feature presentation is a film called I Accuse My Parents.
And this certainly feels like a feature-length educational film reel, between the title drop in the first minute to the "What have we learned?" closing narration. But unlike Starfighters, which was slow and boring with barely distinguishable stories and characters, I Accuse My Parents actually has a lot of forward momentum. There's a distinct main character with a clear-cut and easily understandable motivation. And Jimmy is one of the more bizarrely interesting leads ever featured on MST. He may be a complete twat, but it's hard to imagine that Joel and the bots could have done this same psychological profile on Mitchell or Rousdower. In fact, all of the host segments in this episode are really solid, and they all draw directly on the film for inspiration. From the bots drawing out their ideas of family in the opening to parodying a key scene in the closing segment, even to straight up recreating the musical number. All in all, it feels more like an affectionate send-up to the film rather than outright mockery. Speaking of Are You Happy in Your Work, it's the rare musical number in an MST offering that doesn't bring the story to a complete halt, and is actually fun and entertaining. Yeah, the so-called message of the film might be animalicious and kind of questionable, but the story is solid and the characters are actually really well fleshed out, at least by MST standards. So I guess the real lesson here is, if you must make an educational film reel, at least make it fun.
Sorry, Joel, didn't catch that. We came this close to losing...
Rodney.
Right. Almost lost Rodney.
Number 3.
What do you mean, thanks? Your experiment this week, Joel, is the first in the famous Gamera turtle movies.
Over the years, there were recurring creators on MST that gained a bad reputation among the riffers. Coleman Francis, Joe Don Baker, Ed Wood, and Sandy Frank, distributor of the Gamera films in the US. Yet the Gamera films are among the less painful to sit through. Sure, the effects are dated and kind of cheesy, although I'd actually argue they got worse as the films went on. The original managed to look the least dated. And there's something just kind of charming about the original, between the puppets and the sound effects and Kenny's too dumb to live antics. His odd behavior is actually treated as such, making him a less punchable protagonist than some of the more obvious designated heroes. It's just a simple monster movie, and a pretty enjoyable one at that.
Hey, Joe, remind you of anything?
Yeah, it reminds me of that.
Hey!
Number 2.
What do you mean, thanks?
But there's still one button that works, so you're still getting your final movie. I give you Diabolik.
This probably wasn't the best film to end on. Yeah, it's kind of strange and a lot of the sets look weird and the story's a little weak, but for the most part, it's a solid film. A little over the top maybe, but that's intentional, which is just not as funny as over the top on accident. As a result, the riffing in this episode is kind of weak. The most Mike and the Bots can muster are some cracks about the weirder imagery and the usual pop culture references. For the final episode, Diabolik isn't really one people talk about. It's nowhere near as famous as Manos or Space Mutiny. But maybe that's the point. The show was coming to an end, and it was a sad time for everyone. The final episode is much better remembered for its host segments, and we have one of the best films ever featured on the show to thank for that.
This has been the official biopic of Larry Fine.
And thanks for not sending such a bad movie this time.
Number 1.
What do you mean, thanks?
Is this cheating? This feels like I'm cheating. Oh well.
This Island Earth can be yours if the price is right.
This Island Earth was the film featured in the feature film release of Mystery Science Theater, which could just have easily been called Executive Meddling the Movie. One of the caveats Paramount gave the Best Brains was that the chosen movie had to be not that bad. But, as we've discussed, the quality of a riff tends to be inversely proportional to the quality of a film. There's just not that much for them to tear apart here. Not that This Island Earth is a classic, and a lot of it does look pretty dated, but compared to the usual offerings on MST, this was a 5-star triumph. Decent writing, competent acting, good effects. Most films featured on MST had to be cut for time, but most of the time you don't really notice it, or you might even find yourself wondering what they could possibly have left out.
Do something! Gah!
But with This Island Earth, I actually did feel like I was missing something. Especially when it came to Exeter. I found him fascinating anyway. What could have compelled him to betray his race and save the humans? The Best Brains always made sure to include enough of the original film that the story still made sense. But here, everything about this production just feels incomplete. Most of the time the riffing makes these bad movies bearable, but I'd willingly sit through This Island Earth all by itself. Maybe it's not the best film in the world, but it's certainly a cut above the standard MST fare, and my pick for the most tolerable film ever featured on the show.
Exeter died on impact. Brack was arraigned in Superior Court, County of Los Angeles. In a moment, the results of that trial.
Hope you enjoyed this list, and let me know what you would consider the least awful films ever featured on MST. Thanks again for watching, and as always, I'm eternally optimistic, and I'll catch you guys next time.